right, it's week 8 in the NFL, and the Falcons are on the road this week, going down to Raymond James Stadium to take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's the second time seeing this team in 1 month. Also saw them in week 5 at home, won that game, and now they're back in Tampa Bay. They're in the creamsicle uniform today, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Let me ask you this really fast. Who's got the better throwback, creamsicle or the Dirty Bird throwback?
How do you answer this question?
I mean,
you're setting me up for failure here because we don't have anything that's called creamsicle, okay? But so if you're like old school and you like some of like the vintage colors and jerseys and stuff, you got to give the little bit of edge to Tampa Bay because there's nothing like it. There's nothing like the creamsicles out there.
I mean, they're cool. They're cool. But the red helmet is just like iconic. I think. I'm an apologizer for the throwback for the Falcons,
okay.
But they're in the throwbacks today, Tampa Bay. We saw them last time, week 5, and the Falcons were in the throwbacks that time. Of course, Falcons won 36-30 in overtime thanks to a Kadarius Hodge overtime touchdown. But let's kind of talk about this team because a lot has changed, and we'll get to those changes in a couple of seconds. But let's talk about this Falcons team first. Let's start there. Because I feel like coming into week 5, week 6, and then you hit week 7, and that was what happened in week 7. It just felt like it was flat from the team and and being at home. It just felt flat all the way around. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I went into the Seattle game thinking for whatever reason, and you could make the argument that every game is a must-win in the National Football League, but I'm thinking it as, okay, 3 straight divisional wins, got yourself in great position, looking at a playoff spot if you just continue to do what you're supposed to do for the rest of the season. Facing a Seattle team, lost 3 straight games, got to travel all the way across the country. To me, it just had trap game written all over it. If you don't show up and play, then that's what's going to happen. Is Seattle's going to end up putting together a couple of drives, a couple of interesting plays, explosive plays downfield. We knew about DK Metcalf coming into the game. He ended up making a couple big-time plays in that game. We knew that Geno Smith was going to throw it around the yard. Didn't necessarily throw it as much as he has in previous games. But Atlanta just came out flat. Couldn't really get anything going offensively, wasn't really stingy defensively, didn't really make any splash plays on special teams, and that's what happens in the National Football League. You don't come out and execute each and every week, no matter what the opponent is doing. Remember, Taylor, they are professionals too, right? And we just didn't execute, and that's what happens. You end up losing the game.
Yeah, and I think whenever that happens, and I think it shows how close this NFC South race is going to be, because then it felt like everyone was kind of watching Tampa, watching what the Saints or Carolina was doing to see if they were going to lose their games too, because if the Falcons lose, well, we need everyone else to lose so that we can stay at the top of the NFC South. Obviously, the Buccaneers, they did end up losing last week to the Ravens. Falcons are still atop of the NFC South right now. But if the Falcons win today against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they will have swept this series, meaning that the tiebreaker will kind of shift into the Falcons' what's the word I'm
favor.
looking? Thank you, favor. Good grief. So that's what happened last week. Buccaneers, they lost to the Ravens in prime time. Good grief, I can't get my words out today, excuse me. But they've kind of been on a pattern recently, their last 4 games, win, loss, win, loss. So could they possibly win today at home, being back at home in Raymond James Stadium with those creamsicle jerseys on?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, this is another one of those games for Atlanta that I look at and I say, you got a chance to create some major separation in the division today if you can go down to Tampa and come away with a victory. Obviously, the way that they've started the season, but Tampa, as you mentioned, been kind of going back and forth a little bit. Again, we're going to get into some of the losses as far as personnel goes for Tampa in just a moment. But to me, I go back to what Coach Raheem Morris was always saying before the season started. Our goal is to outrun the South. Well, guess what? You want to outrun the South? This is a critical game to win today. You end up going 4-0 in the division. You end up beating Tampa twice. You got 2 teams in the division remaining that might be reeling a little bit in New Orleans and Carolina. Again, we don't want to go down that road yet because the focus today is against the Tampa Bay Bucs. Difficult place to go in and get a victory. And Baker Mayfield, you know he's a competitor. Yes, he's going to be without Evans and Godwin. Again, we'll talk about it a little bit more in a moment. But he's a competitor. He's going to find ways to make plays, whether it's tight ends, whether it's running backs, or whether that's himself running with the football, just chucking it down the yard, trying to find ways to score points. One thing I do know, they've been 2-2 in the last 4 games. They've averaged over 36 points a game. Even though they lost 2 games, They've still found a way to score points. That's got to be a focus for this Falcons defense, is Tampa is going to score points.
Yes, and I think right now, week 7 through 11, I kind of talked to you earlier about this before the show started. I think 7 through 11 for the entire NFL season, those are kind of the hardest weeks, because week 1 through 6, you're figuring out who your team is and what you look like and what this team could possibly be like. And then week 12 through 18, it's like, okay, well, we got to win right now, or we have our division handled, and we can kind of relax a little bit. But I think weeks 7 through 11 are so important in order to not get complacent in where you are and what you feel like this team is already. You have to win these games weeks 7 through 11, because when you get to week 14, when you get to week 15, you're going to be scratching your head and thinking, why didn't we just try a little bit harder in week 7, week 8, and week 9?
Yeah, I mean, I would make the argument that stretch that you're talking about, weeks 7 through 11, is where the true top teams in the league, they perform. They don't take weeks off. They don't have bad performances, or if they do, they don't let them compound into one loss turning into 2 or 3 losses, right? That's kind of where we are with the Seattle game from last week, is don't allow that performance to turn into another loss, which is a divisional game, and you end up, they kind of compound on top of each other. So you're right. I mean, you look at some of the teams that are at the top of the NFL as far as win-loss record right now. Kansas City, you could say Minnesota, you could say Detroit Lions, you could say Buffalo. Those are all the teams where maybe if we look back in December, we're going to say, how did those teams do in that stretch? How did Atlanta do in that stretch compared to those teams? And if you want to be in that conversation, if you want to be in that tournament, if you will, once January comes around, it comes back to how did you fare in November to set yourself up in December to go win a division and get yourself into the postseason.
You list those top teams, and something about those top teams that win a lot of playoff games and end up going to the Super Bowl is they have complete teams from the top to the bottom at every position. They have a great quarterback. They have good wide receivers. They have good tight ends. They have a good pass rush. And that's something that this Falcons team is struggling with right now, is their pass rush. I think last week before Seattle, Grady Jarrett said, look, it's not the time to press the panic button, but this is something that we are working on. We know that this is an issue. We know this is a problem. It's not time to press panic quite yet, but we have to get the quarterback on the ground. We have to pressure the quarterback more and more on all these snaps. We did not see that last week. What is this pass rush missing? I think I could ask you that every single week, but it feels like they're so close to being good and great. What's not clicking right now?
It's almost like the old adage is like when you're trying so hard for something, it's not going to happen, right? Like when you press so hard, like the old Quicksilver analogy, right? If you squeeze it too hard in your hand, it's just going to squeeze out in between your fingers and out the sides. It's like, I almost feel like that's what it is with the pass rush. It seems like everybody is just like, oh my gosh, we got to sack the quarterback. We got to sack the quarterback. And then you look up at the end of the game and we haven't sacked the quarterback. Atlanta sits with 6 sacks in the season, as we know, still last in the National Football League. Here's a quick comparison. Okay, New York Giants are first in the National Football League in sacks. They have 31 sacks so far through 7 games, the same amount of games played as the Atlanta Falcons. And you think about the top sacker on that team is Dexter Lawrence. He has 9 sacks. That's more than Atlanta has as a team. Now, what I also go back to is the New York Giants are 2-5 this season. So you could make the argument, is sacking the quarterback that important to win-loss record? Well, not necessarily. Obviously, the New York Giants are not succeeding, and they're getting after the quarterback, so it's just one piece. Is it a piece that's very important? Absolutely, because we invested in a player, Matthew Judon, in August that we felt like was going to come in and be that difference maker. Hasn't happened quite yet. We have health on the defensive line. We have playmakers. We have defensive tackles. So you can't sit there and say, well, the guys on the outside aren't getting loose because we got guys on the inside that are getting single block. That's not the case. I mean, I think there's teams that are devoting 2 players to blocking Grady Jackson, blocking David Onyemata in the middle. It just gets back to, at the end of the day, you got to go make plays. Somebody has to decide. You're going to put your team on your back, and I'm going to be the one that's going to kind of break this can open, if you will, and start getting after the quarterback. Because I feel like once 1 or 2 comes, then it's going to be 4 or 5. And then all of a sudden you're going to look up and be like, where was this all season? 5 sacks in 1 game? That's what Atlanta needs desperately.
I love that you mentioned that a good pass rush, a great pass rush, does not mean that you're winning the games, right? You don't need a great pass rush to win games. I think the Falcons have proved that pretty much throughout the last 7 weeks, excuse me. But I think when you get into playoffs, you have to have a pass rush in order to stay alive. I think when you get to the playoffs, you have to have a full, complete team that can stand their ground and play their position, be on those one-on-one matchups, have Caden Ellis on the edge and getting to the quarterback. You have to have a full, complete team to be able to not just play in the playoffs, but to be good in the playoffs and to advance throughout the playoffs. And of course, that's kind of what Raheem Morris has been talking about all season long, is outrunning the South, winning the NFC South division and going to the playoffs. And if it's the Falcons want to get to the playoffs, but they don't want to just get to the wild card and be done and that's it. Like, okay, great season, everyone. They want to continue to progress, and I think that has to click for pass rush, because it feels like right now everything else seems to really be clicking. It's just that pass rush. Yes, you mentioned doesn't win a lot of games, and of course this Falcons team has not been doing great on sacks, but Baker Mayfield had 20 sacks already this season, but 12 of those sacks came in week 2 and 3. Obviously they fixed something on that offensive line to where he's only had 7 sacks in the last 4 games. They are allowing the lowest pressure rate in the NFL right now at 3.5%. So let me ask you this. How does a pass rush that is struggling right now with like Grady Jarrett, Matthew Judon, David Onyemata, Zach Harrison, all the rotation that they have and all the depth that they have, how do they manipulate a pocket like Tampa Bay that is doing so well at not allowing pressures to their quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's easy and here's the plan to do it, because again, Tampa Bay is planning the same way. How do we end up putting our quarterback in the best chance to succeed without having 2 of his best receivers in the lineup? Well, one thing you know is that Baker Mayfield is a savvy quarterback. He's got athleticism. He's going to get away from some of that pressure. We just saw that stat since week 4, 3.5% pressure rate. What does that mean to me? Well, the offensive line has buckled down a little bit, but Baker Mayfield has also found a way to elude away from some of those sacks. And I think that's going to end up being a key to this game that we'll get to later on in the pregame show. But you have to continue to attack. You have to make sure all the gaps are covered up, and then somebody just has to win a one-on-one matchup. I mean, that's what it goes back to. All the guys that end up leading the National Football League in sacks or in the top 5 in sacks, they find ways to win individual matchups, whether that's a signature pass move, whether that's an arsenal of pass rush moves, but they find a way to beat a tackle, to beat a guard. They use a stunt, a twist, and they find a way to get on the edge. You just have to find a way to win a one-on-one matchup. Doesn't that sound familiar? I think that's kind of the National Football League, right?
Exactly. But we're not the only people that are wondering how to fix this pass rush right now for the Falcons. Raheem Morris was actually asked about it earlier in the week during his press conference, and this is what he had to say.
You got to finish the plays off, right? You can get back there. You know, the intentional grounding, you want that to be a sack. The one they fumble, that's not counted as sack. When Rook actually, I don't know how that's done, but Rook gets him down, and you got JSW finishing off a sack yesterday, right? And like, you want to have more, and we got to play individually better, but we are rushing as a group better. Like the hurries, the pressures, the things of that nature, they're going up. They're on an uptick. But the only way you can end that question is if you go finish off sacks, right? But at the same time, you can't let that get in the way of you executing your job and jumping off sides, right? You can't let that be a factor on the reason that you don't do the job the right way. It's got to be done the right way. Technique and opportunities got to meet to make those plays.
Falcons pass rush has a QB pressure rate of 17.5 right now with 43 QB pressures at the moment. That's 27th in the league. Yes, you are ticking up. The Falcons pass rush is ticking up in terms of pressures, but like you said, he's a savvy quarterback, this Baker Mayfield guy. He can move out of the pocket and he can still make a play, and he can play off time and off schedule. How do you not let him get in your head today when you're trying to either pressure him or get him on the ground?
One play at a time. That's what you got to remember with Baker Mayfield. This is one play at a time, because he's very good. He's having a great season. I mean, he's coming into this game, he's second in the NFL in passing yards at just over 1,850 yards on the season. He's having a great season. So you got to understand that he's going to beat you every once in a while, and hopefully you can beat him every once in a while. But it kind of goes back to the same thing that you could say on defense and on offense, is you have to have a short-term memory. If Baker Mayfield does end up beating you for a 17-yard scramble, don't let it fluster you. You got to go back. Just like Raheem Morris said, you got to go back, and don't let that be an excuse to do something wrong on the next play, like jumping off sides. You just got to remember, You play the play call that comes in from the sidelines, and then you just have to execute. You got to beat the offensive line. So, yeah, Baker Mayfield's probably going to make some plays today. He's having a great season. You got to remember that he's a pro, we're a pro, but don't let one good performance end up affecting you and let it turn into 2, 3, or 4.
All right, well, this week it feels like Falcons fans and national media are looking for this pass rush for the Falcons to do something against Baker Mayfield. But if you look just a couple of weeks ago when the Tampa Bay Buccaneers came up to Atlanta, people were wondering when this offense was going to get going with Kirk Cousins and throwing the ball in the air to his wide receivers. I sat down with Drake London and Darnell Mooney. That game of 509 passing yards for 4 touchdowns and what they hope to do today. Drake London, Darnell Mooney. In y'all's opinion, how do y'all's playing styles work so well together to create such a lethal unit?
How we compare with each other, like he's the big monster guy, you know, gonna do the nasty and dirty work. I'm gonna do some little bit of nasty work, and then I'm the speedster and, you know, take it off the top things. So we're out there, you know, playing our best ball. I mean, we're not chasing the statistics part of it. We're out there trying to win the game.
I asked him about his routes and stuff like that, getting the blind spots and just things that I can't physically do as well as he can, and trying to put that into my game. I think that just the contrast of our playing style helps a lot. And then too, it's just tough for defenses to kind of hone in on one person.
Yeah, I feel like we're unstoppable. When we're out there, you can't guard us both at all. Especially, like, I love when we're on the same side of the ball, and it's like, you got to make a decision what you want to do on this one. One of us is going to get the ball here. Make a decision who you want to take away.
All right, so let's talk about week 5, because, like, come on. Y'all both had over 100 receiving yards. You had a touchdown. You had 2. For you personally, what was that game like for you? It just felt like there was something special on the field, and we were finally seeing it click. Did it feel that way for you?
We're just playing and trying to play our best. And then when you look up at the end, it's kind of like, oh crap, like, we really did that, you know? Everybody almost went for 100 piece.
Going down to Tampa, second time we're seeing this team. I know that 509 passing yards and 4 touchdowns is not the expectation, right? But it is a ceiling in a way. What is the expectation going down to Tampa this weekend?
I think just to go down there and dominate. I mean, the division games are mandatory. I mean, you have to win these games. We're trying to set our standard and be consistent with that standard.
We're growing and evolving as we speak right now, and I think that whatever we want this offense to be, it's gonna be. So we have all the puzzle pieces to do so.
Always so much fun to sit down with them. Something that I loved so much was what Mooney said is, I love when we're on the same side of the ball because you got to pick one. One of us is going to get the ball, and you got to pick one of us to defend. And I think what's so fun about watching both of them is they have such different playing styles, right?
Yep.
Like Drake is going to get those crazy balls. He's going to, you know, give like stiff arm you, and he's going to hit you. But Mooney's going to create space. He's a little faster than Drake is. And so those two together, they complement each other so well. And I think, let me ask you this, because Darnell is a little bit older than Drake. How do you think Darnell has helped Drake's game, or vice versa maybe?
Well, I think we just heard it from Drake where he was just kind of trying to pick his brain as far as the things that maybe Darnell Mooney can do that Drake can't. And he says, well, maybe I could take a little piece of his game and add it to my arsenal and make it even better. I may not be able to do completely what Darnell Mooney can do, but maybe he's seeing something a little differently that I haven't seen in my short NFL career. So it seems like they're kind of feeding off of each other. One thing I loved about the piece, it seems like Darnell Mooney has so much confidence in that duo right now. That's a great thing to have offensively when he says, I love it when we're on the same side. You got to pick one of us to stop because the ball's coming, and who are you going to stop? And the other thing that I loved out of that, division games are mandatory. Mm-hmm. That's the mindset that you have to have, especially this week. Going on the road to Tampa, you got to say this win is mandatory.
Mandatory. So the Falcons have their one, I call them wide receiver 1A and 1B. I don't call them wide receiver 1 and 2 because they're so good together. They're quite the duo. But it's a different story for the Buccaneers because last week Mike Evans and Chris Godwin both came out of the Baltimore Ravens game last week on a Monday Night Football game, and they are both not playing today. Let's go ahead and get to the inactives today for the Buccaneers. As you can see, Mike Evans, he is inactive. Tyke Smith also inactive. Flip over to the Falcons. Troy Anderson still inactive, and Justin Simmons, a safety, will be inactive today. He's been dealing with a hamstring injury. He was doubtful coming into the game today. He will be inactive. But the story lies with Tampa Bay. Yeah. Number 13. He got 100 receiving touchdowns last week against the Ravens. What do you make of not having Mike Evans and not having Chris Godwin?
I mean, it's obviously huge losses, right? It'd be a big loss to not have one of the guys, but then to not have both of them is a huge loss for Tampa Bay, and it's a matchup that Atlanta needs to take advantage of in this game today. I mean, just think about how productive these guys have been throughout the course of their career. I mean, Chris Godwin was number 3 in receiving yards in the NFL this year and doing a ton of his, you see that YAC, Chris Godwin, YAC, yards after catch, 365 yards after catch. So he's been making plays after he's been getting the football in the hands. You got both guys here, career, over 1,000 receiving yards against Atlanta. Obviously, they've had a lot of games to play against this team. But Mike Evans, 13 career touchdowns against the Falcons. Chris Godwin, 9 career touchdowns against the Falcons. These guys have played, Mike Evans, 19 games against Atlanta, 14 games against Atlanta for Chris Godwin. So you think about where is the offense going to come from for Tampa Bay? Well, we're going to get into that. But how do they end up adapting their offense this week without having two? You could call Mike Evans is going to be a Hall of Famer. Chris Godwin is probably going to end up rewriting the record books, even though Mike Evans is still on the same team with Tampa Bay. 2 extremely productive receivers, so they're going to have to shift. They're going to have to put a little bit more onus on the tight end group. They're going to have to put a little bit more onus on the running back group, and then a couple of wide receivers are likely going to have to step up and maybe not replace, but give them some production to help keep this offense on schedule.
Yeah, Baker Mayfield leads the league right now in touchdown passes with 18. 11 of those passes went to either Godwin or Evans. These guys are their standard 1 and 2, 1A and 1B. This is the Mooney and the London for Baker Mayfield. Together, they when Baker throws the ball, it's going to them 46% of the time. That's almost half of the time that Baker's throwing the ball. It's going to go to one of these guys. They're huge misses for these guys to be out this week. Obviously, Chris Godwin was placed on IR. He will be out for the foreseeable future. And Evans is week to week right now with the hamstring injury that he's been dealing with. You said it. These guys are part of the team. They are a face of this franchise in a way, Godwin, Evans, and Mayfield. And Todd Bowles was asked about that earlier. How are you going to game plan with your 2 wide receivers out? How do you make a game plan around these guys that haven't gotten many reps? And he says, look, well, I'm going to be honest. We have to whittle this down. We can't give them the entire playbook and expect them to do what Mike Evans and Chris Godwin can do week in and week out. They can't handle it. That's fine though. That we're gonna whittle down our play calls, and we're gonna give them what we know that they can do. So let's talk about those guys that are possibly going to come in for Chris Godwin and Mike Evans today. Who are the guys on your list?
Well, you like to think Sterling Shepard's going to have to step up. He's a guy that was a former second-round pick. He's in his 9th year in the National Football League, and obviously he played with Baker Mayfield in college. So they've got some history. They've got a little bit of chemistry, maybe not as much in 2024, and Jalen McMillan as well. But think about these 2 guys that are stepping up. Combined 14 catches this season and 2 touchdowns. Sterling Shepard's touchdown actually did come against the Falcons in that Thursday night football matchup. So these are the guys where it's just the whole NFL mantra, right? Next man up. Somebody's got to step up and bring that production. So it's going to probably be those guys. And then you got to think Cade Otton is probably going to have to factor into the mix a little bit more in this game. It hasn't necessarily been one of those premier tight ends in the National Football League, but you could make the argument for Tampa Bay that if they're going to stay on schedule, he's going to have to elevate his play this week against Atlanta. So if you're the Falcons, how do you defend what Tampa Bay is likely going to do? Well, you got to make sure that Baker Mayfield doesn't just have these next guys come up and they end up throwing for 300 yards, because that would be a huge missed opportunity. But to me, I feel like, Taylor, it's going to shift to the running back position, because Tampa Bay feels really comfortable with the 2 backs they have in the backfield. Not only can they run it, we saw that against Atlanta in the Thursday night football matchup. They ran for 160 yards in that game, but both of those guys can also catch the ball out of the backfield. So that's the passing game element that Baker Mayfield will likely try to pivot to a little bit, is I can throw the ball to these guys coming out of the backfield because we've got the chemistry. I feel confident with them, and I've seen them make plays through the first 7 weeks of the year.
Let's talk about that running back core really fast. Bucky Irving, he did not practice Wednesday or Thursday, but he is active today. When you look at that rookie and what he's able to do, along with Rachaad White, well, what do you make of these guys? Like you said, they can catch the ball as well. They can be a wideout in a way. How do you stop the production of these guys and not just focus on them, but focus on everyone else on the field at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, you got to know that the ball's going to go in their hands because they're guys that have been there the entire season and they feel really confident with them. I think the two running backs, Irving and Rachaad White, are similar and different a little bit, right? Like Bucky Irving's probably got a little bit more explosiveness, a little bit more short area quickness, and Rachaad White might have a little bit more physicality, just a little bit. But both of those players have the same attributes. They can both be physical and they both can make you miss in space. But they're going to use these guys coming out of the backfield in the passing game because they have to, because these are the guys that they need to step up. So if you're Atlanta, again, your nickel players, your linebackers, when your job is to make sure that these guys, they're coming out of the backfield, you got to run step for step with them, and you got to make plays. You got to try to knock the ball loose, or if they do catch it, you got to catch it for a 4-yard gain and not a 14-yard gain. So to me, tackling is going to be so important in this game. As those running backs come out of the backfield and they make some plays in the passing game, you got to make the tackles. You cannot have missed tackles, or if you're a safety coming up, you can't miss the tackle, again, to give up what looks like a 4-yard gain turns into 14, 24, drive stays alive, offense stays on the field.
Yeah, this Tampa Bay Buccaneers rushing offense, they're 8th in the NFL right now, rushing about 135 yards per game. Falcons, however, on the defensive side of the ball, they're allowing 137 yards per game. So it's going to be an interesting matchup to see who can who can get more yards or who can stop them from getting more yards. So we'll see what happens with the run game today. Let's go ahead and get to the keys to the game. Presented by Wells Fargo. Of course, there are 3, as they always are. What is the first key to the game today?
All right, let's start. We're going to win the turnover margin. Atlanta needs to win the turnover margin. So Atlanta's still sitting in a -3 on the season so far. Tampa Bay at +1. If you think back to the Thursday night matchup, this one was tied 1 apiece, right? 1 turnover for each team. And so they're kind of even as far as the season series go. But I always look at when you're going to play on the road, right? You're going to be working against the crowd noise all game long. This has to be an area of focus. It hasn't been a strength so far from Atlanta this year. It's got to be a strength in this game. They got to find a way to win the turnover margin. Defensively, can they get some more takeaways? That's been one area Atlanta just hasn't been able to do, is take the football away enough this year. Can you find ways to strip the ball loose on these ball carriers that we just talked about, or tipped passes? We know that Justin Simmons is not going to be there in this game. That doesn't mean he's the only person back there that can pick off passes. Let's find a way to get takeaways, and then ball security for anybody that touches the football. It's going to be so important in this game. You got to win the turnover margin when you're playing on the road.
I think if I remember correctly, last time we played Tampa down in Tampa, I was begging for anybody but Jesse Bates to get an interception. And Richie Grant got an interception, and he's playing today because Justin Simmons is out. So we'll see if he's able to get an interception today.
There we go.
AJ Terrell got one in Carolina, and so did Clark Phillips. So we'll see what this secondary is able to do in terms of those takeaways. But I agree, I would love to see more takeaways for this defense, way less takeaways for this offense. What's your second key of the game today?
All right, it's going to be establish the run. And this is another one of those where I could make this key every single game. And I would definitely make it when I had the 2 running backs that are on Atlanta Falcons roster. Establish the run. It's been an area that's been kind of up and down this year. Atlanta averaging just shy of 120 yards per game. And if you look at Tampa Bay, they're giving up about 132 yards per game on the ground. So it looks like it's kind of an even matchup. Yes, you want to go back to look at the Thursday night football and say, well, Kirk Cousins threw for 509 yards. Let's just do that again. You know that's not always sustainable in the National Football League. But I do know is that if you can get Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier going in the run game, and those guys can end up making people miss, Tyler can run some people over, Bijan can run some people over, it's only going to help the passing game. So if you combine 1 and 2, don't turn the ball over on offense, and you establish the run game, I think things are going to open up downfield for the 2 guys that we heard from earlier, Drake London and Darnell Mooney and Kyle Pitts, anybody getting into the conversation, but establishing the run is going to be so important. Again, playing on the road, quieting the crowd down a little bit. First down, right? First down running. That kind of quiets the crowd down and allows Kirk to be able to operate this offense better.
I said it in that feature with Mooney and London, and I think it's important for everyone at home to remember this. 509, 4 touchdowns, great stat line. That is not the expectation. You just said it. It's not sustainable. You can't do that every single week. Would it be really awesome if you did? That would be that'd be like a Hall of Fame season, though. Come on, that would be awesome to see. But that's not the expectation. That's almost a ceiling in a way for this Falcons team to possibly break down the road. Could it be today? Maybe, but I don't think that's plausible for us as people that watch this game and cover this team, and for coaches and the players to, amount to and try to get to. It's not sustainable. So obviously getting that running game going with Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier, they're a deadly duo, those two. And then you let the duo of Drake London and Darnell Mooney get some catches through the air. So we'll see what happens today. Obviously, establishing the run is important for this Falcons team, has been for a while. What is your third and final key?
Third and final is defend the off-schedule plays. So you're going to probably say, well, Rack, what is an off-schedule play? Well, we talked a lot about Baker Mayfield, and we talked about his athleticism, especially getting outside the pocket. When he gets outside the pocket and he keeps his eyes downfield, that's the definition of an off-schedule play. That's where you have to defend, because a lot of times when it looks like a near sack or Baker Mayfield's going to run it and he's going to end up coming up short on the first down, that's when you end up giving up the explosive plays, because the defense starts to react to the quarterback trying to come up to make a tackle, and likely they leave somebody open. Or scramble rules apply and somebody finds a window open when it looks like on a 3rd and 12, you're going to get Baker Mayfield down on the ground. They're going to have to punt. Instead, it ends up being a 16-yard completion and a first down. That just kills the momentum for the defense. Now they got to completely reset, come back on first down, and try to get another stop and get off the field. So defending the off-schedule plays. Once Baker Mayfield gets outside the pocket, he comes up inside the pocket, that's when you really have to buckle down. Make sure you either tackle, again, talked about this already, or you can't completely abandon your coverage responsibility, because that's when you're going to give up an explosive play.
Yeah, it's very similar to my singular key to the game, which is really just a preference today, which is just I need to see more pass rush from this team as a whole. Taylor's preference, there it is. We got
there it is.
You guys, thanks for that graphic.
Week 8.
I just need some more pressure on Baker Mayfield today. I would love to see them finishing the drill, not just pressuring, but getting him on the ground. Also, something else to note, we did not really speak about this today. Obviously, with Evans and Godwin both out, I think we could possibly see really lax playing style from this secondary. I don't want to see that at all. I need to see this secondary going out, playing hungry, playing to their keys, going on their one-on-one matchup. That's 2 keys to the game right now.
Taylor's second preference.
I just gave you 5 keys to the game right now. Second preference. I'm getting crazy. I need to see more pressure on the passer, and I need to see the secondary lock in and play to their keys and defend what they say, every blade of grass. So we'll see if they can do that today. We'll see.
I see an animation in the future of like a little Taylor character, and she's kind of like dancing around a little bit, and it's Taylor's preference. Like, I got a vision for the future of this.
Oh, please don't give them any ideas. It's just going to turn into a mess. Anyway, we're going to get out of your hair because the game starts in just under 30 minutes. The game today is going to be on Fox starting at 1 p.m. This is an NFC South matchup to see who's going to stay atop of the NFC South. See you guys next week.